Welcome! It's time to go to school on Performer, the award-winning MIDI sequencing software from Mark of the Unicorn. Performer's many features include unlimited tracks, 4 editing environments, event list, graphic, notation, and tracks overview. Custom consoles with an unlimited number of sliders and knobs, and the ability to print music notation in either single parts or in score format. Lance Abair has become well known to musicians everywhere through his freelance goes to school video owner's manuals on MIDI instruments such as the Core Gam 1 and 01 WFD. Now he uses his straight-ahead, non-technical style to help you get more power from this great software sequencer. It's recommended that you have your VCR and television hooked up next to your computer, as Lance walks you through many of the exciting procedures of Mark of the Unicorn's Performer.
Hi, my name is Lance Abair, and I'd like to thank you for watching our video manual for Performer. I've been a registered user for 6 years, and I'm excited to have this opportunity to show you how to get the most out of this great program. If you're new at sequencing, don't worry that this video will be full of technobabble and hard to comprehend. I'm a musician, and I've designed this video so that you can learn how to use Performer from a musical standpoint without having to become a computer engineer. Fortunately, Mark of the Unicorn's approach is the same. Performer is a sequencer program designed by musicians for musicians. It's important to note that this video was produced just as Performer version 4.2 is being released, and that I'm using Macintosh System 7.1 software in my computer. Now let's get going. Version 4.2 uses a system of installation called disk authorization. Before going through the procedure, I recommend reading the entire section in the owner's manual on how to install and authorize Performer. Before installing Performer, you need to disable all CDEVs, which are control panel devices, and extensions. This includes virus protection utilities such as SAM, Virex, Vaccine, Disinfectant, or Gatekeeper. To do this under System 7, restart or turn on your Mac with the Shift key held down while the Welcome to Macintosh message appears. Beneath Welcome to Macintosh, the words Extension Off will appear, and you can let go of the Shift key. Under System 6, you should remove all non-Apple inits and control panel devices from your System folder and then restart your Macintosh. Once the program has been installed and authorized, you can re-enable them. Insert one of your Performer master discs, and you'll find that there's an installer program on it that installs Performer automatically for you. All you have to do is double-click the icon called Double-Click to Install. A box opens up reminding you about what I just went over a second ago. Assuming that you've restarted your Mac after disabling CDEVs and extensions, click Continue. Another box pops up with the Performer installer logo. Click on the OK button. The Easy Install box pops up. I like that word easy. Click on the Install button. Another box pops up to show you what's going on and to tell you what to do. It asks me to please insert disk number 2. I do, and it goes back to work. Now it asks me to insert disk number 3. In goes disk number 3. Back to work. Now I'm asked to insert the Performer master disk. I do, and a box pops up telling me that the installation was successful. At this point, whenever I double-click on Performer to open it, I'll see a box prompting me to insert a master disk. To forego having to use this step each time I open the application, I can use a procedure called hard disk authorization. To authorize our hard disk, hold down the Shift key again and click Restart. I see extensions off, so I can release the Shift key. Make sure that your master disk is not write protected and put it back into the drive. Then double-click the authorizer deauthorizer. A box pops up with an OK button, which I click. Another box appears telling me that I have a remaining authorization count of 1. When I click Authorize, the count on this master disk will become 0. Click Authorize. The next box allows me to select the disk to authorize. Choose your hard drive and click OK. Another box appears saying Authorization is in progress. When the authorization is complete, a box appears showing a remaining authorization count of 0. Click OK. A box appears with a Quit button, which I click. Restart your Mac, and you're ready to go. Let's say that you want to reformat your hard disk or switch your Performer program to another hard disk. To do so, you would use the same authorizer-deauthorizer utility, but this time you would choose Deauthorize. This would move the authorization back to the master disk, making it available to authorize a different hard disk. One of the great things about Mark of the Unicorn is their updating policy. From time to time, a new update disk arrives at my house with improvements to Performer. Mark of the Unicorn regularly releases free updates to add features and improve compatibility. About every year and a half, there'll be a major upgrade with significant new features available for a small charge. Now, when a new update arrives, I can drag it onto the hard disk. I can choose to keep the previous version or drag it into the trash. Your authorization is not lost by dragging the Performer program icon into the trash. In fact, the hard disk remains authorized even when there's no copy of Performer present. One word of advice. When you've finished, Mark of the Unicorn recommends that you archive the old master disks along with their accompanying utilities disks in a safe place. Your MIDI system is a collection of boxes with inputs and outputs that need to be attached to your computer. Current Macintoshes don't include MIDI connections, so a MIDI interface is necessary. MIDI interfaces include at least one input and output so the signals can be routed to and from your equipment and the computer. Interfaces can range from a simple MIDI interface to multi-port interfaces such as Mark of the Unicorn's MIDI Express or the MIDI Timepiece 2 like I use. If you're going to be using multiple MIDI instruments, a multi-port interface is a necessity to enable you to easily incorporate all of your MIDI gear into the sequencing process. Whatever MIDI interface you're using, follow the manufacturer's instructions for hookup. Remember that you'll be running a MIDI cable from your master keyboard's MIDI out to the interface's MIDI in, and then running another cable from the interface's MIDI out to your master keyboard's MIDI in. This may create a MIDI loop, which can cause problems. Your MIDI keyboard is probably already playing its own internal voices with a feature called Local Control On, while it's sending identical information to the computer by way of the MIDI connection. The computer is, in turn, rerouting the same information back to the keyboard by way of a feature called Patch Through. The result is that the keyboard will double trigger 2 notes for every single key you press. This situation uses up twice the available notes and causes a flanged or doubled sound. To correct this problem, find the local setting for your keyboard and turn it off. The Patch Through feature in Performer will allow data to be rerouted to your instrument so that you can hear it. I'll show you how to do this shortly. If you're a new owner of Performer, I'm sure you'll want to get up and running as soon as possible, so that's what we're going to do. I'm now going to go through all the procedures for doing your first sequence. Presuming that you have all your equipment connected properly and have installed Performer 4.2 or newer, let's start by double-clicking on the Performer program icon. A box will appear entitled MIDI Interface. Using this box, we can tell Performer what type of MIDI interface we'll be using, which computer port it'll be connected to, and at what speed Performer will communicate with the interface. In the top section of the box are speed selections. Most regular Macintosh MIDI interfaces run at 1 MHz. Check with your interface's owner's manual for its recommendation. More comprehensive interfaces, such as Mark of the Unicorn's MIDI timepieces, also have the option of running at fast 1x speed. Here's the rule of thumb to use. Some MIDI instruments have difficulty transferring system-exclusive data at the fast speed. If you're planning on using system-exclusive dumps on a regular basis, or you have a regular MIDI interface or MIDI Express, set your speed to 1 MHz. If you're using a MIDI timepiece and you don't plan on using system-exclusive dumps, set the speed to fast mode. Since I'm using the MIDI timepiece 2 connected to the computer's modem port, and I'm also running Unison, Mark of the Unicorn's editor librarian program, I'll check the 1 MHz speed and the MIDI timepiece box under the modem port icon and click the OK button. Under the File pull-down menu, choose New. In a short amount of time, you'll see the basic Performer setup with 8 tracks to start with. Let's take a brief look at the major attractions. At the top is the Consolidated Control section, where all the play and record controls are found. These controls work just like a tape recorder. Stop, rewind, play, pause, and record. To the right of these controls is the counter. It's currently set up to read in measures, beats, and ticks. Beneath it is an auxiliary counter that shows elapsed time. To the far left is the metronome section where we set the tempo. We'll go into greater detail later, but first let's continue getting set up to record something. Beneath the Consolidated Controls window is the Tracks window, which is the central point from which you'll be working most of the time. This is where all of the tracks are found, with places for writing in their names, as well as a system for assigning the tracks to the instruments in your setup. Performer starts off with 8 tracks. There are several columns I need to tell you about. Left to right is the Move column, where you can reposition tracks up or down. By click-dragging the up-down arrow for a track, I can move it to another place in the list. Next to the right is the Loop Indicator column that tells you if a track contains any loops. Next is the Record Enable column. When a Record Enable button is filled in with black, that track is available for recording. Clicking on the Record button turns it on or off. Also, using the up and down arrows like this allows you to move the Record Enable button setting up and down the track list. Next is the MIDI Activity Meters column. These meters act sort of like VU meters signaling track activity. Next is the Play Enable column. Just like the recording column, a blackened pointer enables the track to play. Next is the Channel Assignment column. Since I've selected the MIDI timepiece 2 in the MIDI interface window, I see the characters MA1 as the assignment for track 1. The M stands for modem port, the A stands for all output jacks, and the 1 stands for MIDI channel 1. For those of you who are using standard MIDI interfaces, I'll show you how your setup works. Let me go to the Basics menu and select the MIDI interface like this. I'm going to deselect the MIDI timepiece by clicking its box under the modem port icon. And click OK. And now look at the play channels. They have an M for modem and a channel number to the right. This is what it'd look like if you had a standard MIDI interface. To change to another MIDI channel, click on the play channel like this, and a box opens. You can select or deselect a channel and its port by clicking on its box. Here might be a good time to show you a great shortcut when selecting items from a grid. When you want to select just one box and deselect all others, Option click on the box like this. If you want to select all boxes and deselect only one, Command click on the one you want to be deselected like this. Now Option click on modem port channel 1, click OK, and I'll reassign my interface setting to the MIDI timepiece 2. Basics menu, MIDI interface, MIDI timepiece, click OK. It's done. To the right is the track name column. Farther to the right is the patch name column. And finally, the comments column. The comments column is helpful for writing yourself notes explaining what was done on a track. When I send sequences to friends, I use this column to give them instructions about the sequence. Let's choose the comments column for track 1 by clicking inside the column to the right of track 1. A comments box opens. I'll type first take and click OK. By the way, all of the major Performer windows have a feature called the mini menu. It contains commands pertinent to that particular window. For example, in our currently open Tracks window, press on the mini menu icon to pull the menu down. You can select a menu option as you would on a standard menu at the top of the screen. Adding tracks is easy. Highlight the track name above where you want the new track to appear and select Add from the Tracks window mini menu. To add multiple tracks, hold down the Option key while selecting Add. A box will appear asking how many tracks. Type in any number. I'll use 4. And click OK. Voila! 4 new tracks. To delete tracks, highlight the desired track names and choose Delete from the mini menu. To make an exact copy of a track, highlight its name and select Duplicate Track for the mini menu. This gives you a new empty track with the same MIDI assignment and comments. You can duplicate multiple tracks with one command by highlighting several track names before choosing Duplicate. Non-contiguous. What a term. I finally know what non-contiguous means. It means not being next to something. If you want to select tracks that are non-contiguous, use the shift-click method. I'll choose track 5, then shift-click on track 7 to skip track 6. To deselect any track, shift-click on its name. By the way, this non-contiguous selection with shift-clicking works in the editing windows as well, as you'll see later in the video. Now let's set up some tracks to record on. We'll start with a new file. I'll need 4 tracks, a hi-hat track, a kick-snare track, a bass track, and a piano track. I'll use sounds from my synth module, which is connected to output cable 3. Let's name the tracks first. Option-click on track 1's name, and a naming box opens. We'll type in hi-hat. Down arrow to name the next track kick-snare. And the next track, piano. And finally, bass. Up and down arrows save time, don't they? Now, hit return to lock in our track names. Let's assign cables and MIDI channels to our tracks. Click on the play channel assignment for the hi-hat track to open its assignment grid. Up and down the left side of the grid are the output cable numbers, and across the top are the MIDI channels. It's currently reading MA1, which means that it would play back from all modem output cables on channel 1. The hi-hat and kick snare tracks will be assigned to output cable 3, MIDI channel 10, so move down to output cable 3, and across the right to channel 10, and option click in the box. Notice at the top that the original box was deselected. Thank you, option click. Now, down arrow to the kick snare track, and option click on cable 3, channel 10 also. Then down arrow and set the piano track to cable 3, channel 1. And finally, down arrow to the bass track and set it to cable 3, channel 2. Hit return or click OK to lock in our settings. Now click on the record enable button for the hi-hat track and we should be able to hear the drums. Down arrow to move record enable to the piano track and we should be able to hear the piano. The reason that we can do this is because of a great feature called Patch Through Auto Channelize. Let's up arrow back to the hi-hat track. Click on the Basics pull-down menu and select Patch Through. Notice that Auto Channelize has been selected. This means that no matter what channel your main keyboard is transmitting on, the incoming MIDI data will automatically be recabled and rechannelized to your setting in the Play Channel column for the currently record-enabled track. Now click on the OK button. By the way, remember what I said earlier about making sure that your keyboard local control is set to off? The rule of thumb is local off for the keyboard and patch through auto channelize on in Performer. Moving ahead, we need to first set up a metronome sound to play by. I'm going to show you another great feature. Go up to the Basics menu and select Click and Count Off options. In this new window, we can choose to have the internal speaker of the Mac make the click sound, or we can choose a sound in one of our MIDI instruments to make the click. I prefer a percussion sound in the drum kit of my module to be my click sound. First, I'll click on the MIDI button at the top left. Then go over to the right and choose the correct output cable and channel assignment for the O3R General MIDI drum kit, cable 3 and MIDI channel 10. Notice that there's a setting for the accented click and one for the normal click. The accented click always comes on the first beat of the measure. We'll set both for the O3R. 10. Click on the OK button and make sure that we record enabled a track for cable 3, channel 10, so that we can hear drum sounds. We have. Now go back to the Basics and the click and count off options. Here's another shortcut. At the top right of the window is a pitch selection box for each click. Click anywhere in the top pitch box and tap across your MIDI keyboard until you find the metronome sound you want. Notice that the note letter and number changes as you hit different keys. I'll choose F4 for both the accented and the normal clicks. To the right again, and we're able to see the velocity for both the accented and normal clicks. Now let's set our click options over at the left. You can have the metronome always click, or only during the count off, or only when recording. I'll set it so that it always clicks. There happens to be a shortcut way to switch it on and off that I'll tell you about in a minute. You can also choose to have no accent. I find that the accent helps me to know where the downbeat of each measure is. Below are count off measure options. You can type in any number you want by clicking on the box. I prefer a 2-measure lead-in to give me a good feel for the timing. I also like to have the count off only when recording, so I'll check that box. At the bottom right is the volume for the Mac's internal click volume. You can adjust it by dragging its button to the left or right to increase or decrease the volume like this, or press the buttons on either end of the slider like this. Click the OK button. To turn the metronome on or off, go to the Basics menu and look down at the word click. If there's a check mark to its left, the click is enabled. To turn the click off, drag down to the click and let up on the mouse button. To turn it back on, drag down to the word click and let up on the mouse button again. I'll make sure I left it on. And now here's the great shortcut for turning the metronome on and off. Look to the right of the word click as I open the Basics menu. You see the symbol for the max command key and the number 5 next to it. This means that you can turn the click on or off by pressing the command key and the number 5. You can also do this while the sequencer is playing. Notice as I go through the menus at the top that there are quite a few keyboard shortcuts to save you time. We'll touch on these later. Now back to the sequencer. Let's click on the record button to make sure our click works. It does. Now let's set the tempo. Listening to the click, you can drag the tempo slider to the left and right. Or press the plus or minus buttons until the tempo is to your liking. Another way to set the tempo is to click on the tempo value. Here you can set the beat value like this, and the beats per minute by typing it in. I'll choose 120 beats per minute. Click OK, or the return key, and we're ready to go. To use the count off, I click the count off button under the transport controls for our 2-measure lead in. Another shortcut is to double click on the count off button to directly open the click and count off options dialog box. We'll click on the record enable button for the piano track for our first part. I'll play an 8-bar blues part. To begin recording, just click on the record button and here we go. I click on the stop button, the rewind button, the play button, and listen to my piano part. Now let's play a bass part. Click on the record button for the bass track, and here we go again. When you've finished with each part, click on the stop and rewind buttons to go back to the beginning. To hear what you recorded, click on the play button, just like a tape recorder. Now, all this mousing around can get to be a little too much, so it's time for another shortcut. You can use your computer's numeric keypad to quickly control the main transport functions in the Consolidated Controls panel. The key assignments can be found at the end of the chapter on the Consolidated Controls. By the way, these key assignments will only work if your caps lock key is in the up position. Briefly, here they are. 0 is for stop, 1 is for rewind, 2 is pause, 3 is record, and enter is play. There are several more that we'll get into later. One of the most helpful keypad shortcuts to me is the decimal key, which allows you to set the time in the sequence. It's sort of like an autolocator. To go to a specific point in the song, press the decimal key, and the measure counter is highlighted. I'll choose number 2. Hit the decimal key again, and the beat counter is highlighted. I'll choose 3. Hit the decimal key again, and the tick counter is highlighted. I'll choose 240. Now press the return key to lock it in. Click on Enter to play. And then 0 for stop. That's how easy it is to start at any point of the song. To go back to the beginning of the song, press the 1 key, which activates the rewind button. By the way, the space bar also works as a start and stop key like this. Now would be a great time to demonstrate Performer's Input Quantize feature. Input Quantize works just like the quantization found in drum computers, automatically adjusting the timing of notes as they're being recorded. In the Windows menu, select Input Quantize. Click on the Enable Input Quantization box at the top and set the grid to 1/8 notes. Notice that all quantize options are available with the Input Quantize feature. Now close the window. By the way, I'm setting the grid to 1/8 notes since I don't anticipate playing any rhythms with shorter note values. Record select the hi-hat track and let's go. Stop and hit the 1 key to rewind to the beginning. Hit the space bar and listen. This is getting pretty good. Rewind, record ready the kick snare track. Hit button 3 for record. And here we go. Rewind and play it back. That's all there is to it. Before moving on, let's go back to Input Quantize and disable it. Now I'm going to show you something special. There's a clever way to get quick, on-screen explanations of each feature in the program. It's called Performer Help, and here's how to get it. I want information regarding the ruler bar in the tracks window. I move my arrow to the ruler bar and press the Command, Option, and Shift keys together to change the arrow into the help cursor, and then click. A box appears with information about my subject. To make this window disappear, click anywhere in the window. The help cursor turns back into an arrow. If you have a help key on your Macintosh keyboard, simply strike it once. Help is now turned on and you can click anywhere on the screen to get help on just about anything. You can turn it off by striking the help key again. Performer Help is an online manual of explanations and examples. You can also choose to show or hide help balloons from the help menu. There's a whole section explaining Performer Help in your printed manual. Speaking of Performer Help, there's some wonderful help available on Mark of the Unicorn's tech support phone and fax lines. The tech support phone number is 617-576-3066. And the tech support fax number is 617-576-3609. Knowledgeable specialists on Mark of the Unicorn's products are waiting to answer your questions. Another very important thing to bring up here. Make sure that you've mailed in your Performer registration card. Without it, you won't receive program upgrades and information on Mark of the Unicorn products. Also, when you call into tech support, you'll be asked your name. Support is available for registered users only. Register today. Before we go any further, we want to save the music we recorded. If we needed to stop here, we'll want to be able to come back later and pick up where we left off. Look in the File menu and select Save As. A box pops up with a place to give our file a name. I'll call this first sequence So Far and click on the Save button. The first time you save with Performer, you'll get messages asking if you want to create MIDI configuration and bulk dump files. For now, just hit Stop Asking. You can get complete information about these features from your printed manual. By switching to the Finder and then opening the Performer 4.2 folder, we can see what the file looks like. There it is. Let's create a new folder for sequences by selecting New Folder under the File menu. We'll click on the bottom section of the folder and name it My Sequences. Hit the Return key to lock it in and drag our sequence into it. Now that we've gone through the basics, pause the tape and spend some time assigning tracks to channels, giving them names, setting tempos, and recording tracks. Remember, if you make a mistake, you can turn right around and record the part again. How'd you like to spend 3 hours on a sequence, have a power blackout in your neighborhood, and lose all your work? Save your work frequently. Let's go over some fundamentals of clicking. There's more than one way to click a mouse. Remember our option clicking and command clicking in the playback assignments grid? Go back and review it. Also remember that shift clicking can be used to select non-contiguous data such as track names and events in edit windows. You can open any of the 3 edit windows using special double-clicking schemes. Double-click a track name to open its event edit window. Command double-click a track name to open its graphic edit window. Option Command double-click on a track name to open its notation edit window. You can double-click in any ruler to relocate the main counter to that point. Another great feature is auto scroll with moving cursors. Go to the Basics menu and select Auto Scroll. Click on Set All and click OK. You'll see a cursor move in the tracks window as the music moves from measure to measure like this. One also moves across the graphic and notation edit windows as music plays. You might not know that you can click on the cursor and move it backward or forward to move the sequence to a different time location like this. Let's talk about the tracks window. When you open a file, the track at the top of the list in the tracks window is the conductor track. It's here that key, meter, and tempo changes are entered. You can have as many tempo, meter, and key changes as you wish in a sequence. Double-click on the conductor track of a new sequence. If I know that this song will be in the key of G minor, I can insert a key change at the beginning. Why should I do this? So that the notes in the edit windows will show the proper accidental signs, not to mention the output from printing notation. To insert a key change, click on the I or Insert button. Select Key Change. Choose the time location. And tab over to open the key change box. Click on Minor. Click on the left arrow until you see G minor in the box below and click OK. Now type Return to lock it in. Now for a meter change, click I, select Meter, same location, tab over to the meter designation, type 5/4, tab to the right, select the note value per beat, leave it at a quarter note, tab once more, and type Return. To insert a tempo change, click on the I button. Select Tempo Change. Same location. Set the value for the metronome click, and type in 150. And type the return key. By the way, notice that tempo values can be entered to the hundredths of a beat. Now in the metronome tempo window next to the transport controls, click on the auto button so that Performer will respond to our meter and tempo map that we just entered into the conductor track. Now let's close the conductor track event edit window and close our file. Here's a new file called Edit Menu Examples. Hit the chunk button and select the loop record chunk. Double-click on its name to open its tracks window. In the title bar of the tracks window is a button with a large S in it. This is the solo button. Start the chunk playing and click on the solo button. Now if I want to hear a track by itself, I can click on its name like this. I can shift-click on track names to solo more than one track. Solo buttons also appear on event editing windows. Another great solo feature. What if you wanted to solo a track but still be able to hear the other tracks at a much lower level? Option-click the solo button to select solo setup. In the box that appears, click on the box that says off, and from the many choices, select 50%. This means that tracks that are not being soloed will still be heard, but only at 50% of their velocity. Click OK. There are other percentages available. Choose the one that suits you best. Using our little loop record sequence, I can show you how to quickly create a console of sliders and knobs for controlling volume and panning. Select a track for each cable and channel in this chunk. Piano, bass, and hi-hat. The hi-hat track has the same cable and channel as the kick snare track. Now, in the mini menu, select Create Console. A box pops up with selections available. I'd like to be able to control the volumes and pannings of my tracks. I'll leave the size at small, choose vertical, click volume and pan, and then click OK. Instantly, I have volume and pan controls for each track. Now watch as I play the sequence. This console can be given a name and saved with this file. Your consoles can be opened from the Windows menu near the bottom of the list. See, there it is. One of the most remarkable benefits of Performer is its extraordinary editing power. In Performer, you can transpose sections of music, you can replace wrong notes, you can quantize portions of your performance to get a better rhythmic feel, and a multitude of other operations. Let me show you some of the many ways you can go about choosing the data that you wish to edit. There are 3 separate event editing windows where you can view your MIDI data, in addition to the tracks overview. The first is the event list window. I have a sequence named Eddie's Home, currently open with several tracks recorded. The measure grid at the right is showing one measure at a time. To select one measure of one track, click on it. Double-click on it, and you'll open the event list for this track at this measure. Command double-click, and you'll open the graphic edit window at this measure. Command Option double-click, and you get the notation window. To select multiple measures, click and drag like this. To select multiple tracks and measures, click drag a selection box like this. To select a region of measures, drag across the top of the ruler bar. This action sets the start and end measure numbers in the edit bar. To select tracks, click on their names and they become highlighted. Next is the event list window. Record, enable, and highlight the Groove Drums track. To open the event list window, click on the event list icon. At the far left of the window is a column for the location and time for each event. It's broken down into measures, beats, and ticks. To the right of the time column is the type of event. There are many kinds of events that can show up in this window. For instance, in measure 0, beat 1, and tick 3, we see the icon for a program change with number 9 next to it. How do you insert a controller number or patch change into an event list? Let's say that we'd like to change the volume of this track at measure 6 and make it quieter. Remember, when using control numbers, the values go from 0 to 127. The controller number for volume is 7. We want to adjust the volume of the track at measure 6 to be 64. Click on the I button at the top of the window. I stands for Insert. A box pops up with different types of data we can insert. Since I want to insert a controller number, I click on Controller. A new box pops up with a time location. I'll set it for measure 6, beat 1, tick 000 using the keypad. I can move from field to field either with a tab key or with a decimal key, or I could click on the preferred field with a mouse. Now tab once more and a little box pops up for the control number. Type in the number 7 and tab once more. This little box is for the controller's numeric value. Type in 64. That's it. Hit the return key. Now at measure 6, this track will go to half volume. To insert a program change, click the Insert button and click on Patch Change. I'll set the same time, tab over, and choose program number 13. Hit the return key twice, and there's your program change. Let's say that you decided that you didn't want to make a volume change after all, and you want to delete your volume change. Select the volume change event by clicking on it, and go to the Edit menu and choose Erase. It's gone. A shortcut is to type Command B. Remember, the keyboard shortcuts can be found next to the name of the edit you wish to complete. Take some time to get acquainted with these shortcuts. I'll get rid of this program change by clicking on it and using Command B. To select data from an event list, you can click on it. To select more than one event, click and drag across it like this. All the data that is highlighted is now selected. If I wanted to choose non-contiguous data, meaning events not next to each other, I can shift-click and drag. I'll leave some data alone and then press the Shift key and click over some more. Here's a great shortcut that allows you to go from one track's edit list to another's without having to go back to the Tracks window. This is great. Command-click on this track's name in the title bar of the event list window, and a list of all the tracks will pop up. To change tracks, drag the pointer up or down to the desired track name and release the mouse. This works from event list, graphic, and notation editing windows. This feature is big news. Performer includes a legend in the mini menu that shows you the different types of MIDI data. From the mini menu, choose Legend. A new box appears with a complete explanation of what can be found in the event list. The message here is that if you see something in an editing window that you don't recognize, check in the legend to find out what it is. Now we'll close the legend. Notice at the top of the edit window is a button with a little speaker in it. I can click on the button to darken it, and as I select events in the window, I can even hear them. This is called the audible mode. Very helpful. Let's say that you want to jump to another part of the song. From the mini menu, choose Go To, at which point a box will pop up and you can type in the desired location. Let's choose measure 12. Click on OK or the return key. Presto, we're at measure 12 in the event window. One more trick in this window. Here's how to select a region of events and have them play by themselves. This is really neat. Click and drag to define the region. Now simply press the Option key and the little speaker button. It'll stop playing at the end of the selected region. Now let's close our event list window, select Groove Drums, and click on the Graphic Editing Window button. Remember, for a window to appear, a track name has to be selected. This is the drum track with several different drum sounds playing. To the left, you'll see a keyboard with a note grid to the right. I can adjust the keyboard zoom icons to expand or compress the number of vertical keys. I can also grab the median strip move handle and expand the amount of the top section that can be seen. At the top of the grid are the measure numbers. At the top far left corner are the zoom in and out arrows. I can choose to see more measures at once by clicking on the zoom out arrows like this. The zoom in arrows work like this. This is a great way to get an overall view of music in the track. You can move the note grid up and down using the side scroll bar like this. Also notice that since I've clicked on the audible box, I can click on the keys of the piano and hear the sounds assigned to the keys. Underneath the keyboard and note grid is a section reserved for controller data and velocity and aftertouch data. Between the two sections is where you see patch changes and foot switch data. We'll talk about notes first. Notes are represented by black dots and lines. A black dot is simply a note that's played very short. A line is a note that's held longer. The length of the line shows you how long the note is held down. To select a note, click on it, and a handle will appear at its right end. You can see all the details about this note in the event information box. At this point, you can move it to another note's location. In other words, transpose the one note. Watch. I can also make it earlier or later by dragging it forward or backward. This gets a little touchy because it's easy to accidentally move a note up or down while trying to only drag it forward or backward. There's a great shortcut to prevent moving notes in unwanted directions. You can use the Shift key to constrain the motion of the note either up or down or left and right. Let's say that I want to select a note and move it up, but not to the side. I first click on the note like this. Then, while holding the mouse button down, press the Shift key. At this point, if the first movement I make is vertical, then it'll be impossible to accidentally go horizontal. The opposite is also true. By the way, after I've moved it and I decide I want it to go back exactly to where it was before, I can go to the Edit menu and select Undo Drag. Another hot tip specific to the graphic edit window. If I wanted to select all events of one particular note in the whole song, I can double-click on that note on the keyboard like this. You now see a handle on each event for that note. Probably the number one use for this shortcut is to change one drum sound for another. Let's say that I wanted to change all of these side stick snare note events to a regular snare sound from another key. I can now click on just one of the notes, hold down the Shift key to prevent going sideways, and I can drag it up or down until I hear the drum sound I prefer. Check this out. When I let up on the mouse, all the notes snap into their new locations. To double these notes, use Option Drag to take a copy of the notes to a new pitch like this. Now your drum sound is doubled. The bottom section of this window is for displaying continuous data. Here, continuous data can be selected and reshaped. It can be added and removed. I'll show you some examples of this later. Close this window and we'll record Enable and Option Command click on the Digi piano track to open its notation edit window. I'll resize and reshape this window so we can see things better. I'll also zoom out so we can see more measures at a time. The move handles and zoom buttons all work just like they do in the graphic edit window. To select a note, click on it. If you have several notes tied, click on the first note in line and they'll all be selected. You can now move that note up or down to change it, and with the speaker box selected, you can hear the pitches of the notes. Along the median strip, you'll see program changes and controller numbers. 64 is for the damper pedal. To edit a piece of data, select it and change it in the Edit Information box. Also, to aid in distinguishing pitches, you can transpose the display of notes with the octave up and down buttons like this. When transposed, the octave indicator in the staff margin tells you the degree of transposition. They don't sound any different, but it's easier to tell what they are. To select all data within a region, drag select the region in the time ruler and all data beneath it will be highlighted and available for editing. This data could then be transposed, quantized, or whatever. This window is handy for those who like to view their notes on the grand staff. Also, to select several notes, use a selection box like this. Once you've arrived at a standardized tracks window setup along with metronome preferences and your personal MIDI configuration, you can select under the File menu, Save as New Template. This means that every time you choose New File under the File menu, your customized setup will open with that file. It saves you from having to reset everything when you open a new file. Say you start a sequence playing halfway through. There's probably been some patch and volume changes earlier in the song, but since you didn't play the sequence from the beginning, these changes have not occurred, and you have parts being played by the wrong sounds. To prevent this, select Event Chasing from the Basics menu. For now, leave all boxes darkened. When going into play mode, Performer will check back for any events and adjust your equipment accordingly. Click OK. I have a 4-measure piece of music entered that I want to add on to. Let's listen to it first. I'll call this first segment the intro. In fact, let's introduce you to the markers window to show you how it works. Under the window menu, select Markers. Up pops the Markers window. It's here that you can show the organization of your composition or identify certain hit points during the sequence. We know that measure 1 through measure 4 is the intro, so make sure that the main counter is showing measure 1, beat 1, tick 000. Click on the mini menu in the Markers window and select Add. It instantly adds a marker at the location you chose in the main counter. Now we'll give it a name. Double-click on marker 1 and type in Intro. Hit Return and your first marker is selected. Now, move the Markers window out of the way and let's add to our song by recording a verse using the Auto Record feature. Click on the Auto Record button to open the Auto Record bar directly beneath it. You can select the start point and end point right down to the tick. Most of us record our music a section at a time. You might start out with a chorus, then a verse, and then add an intro later. You'll need to start recording at various measures and time locations to avoid erasing what you've already created. Now let's set our punch-in time. Just in case I play my first note slightly ahead of measure 5, I'm going to set my punch-in location to measure 4, beat 4, and tick 450. Since there's no music at that point of the track, and I want the sequencer to record any anticipations I might play. Notice I simply click on the number fields to change them using the Tab key to move back and forth. Now, tab over to the Out section and set it to any number greater than the length of the music you intend to play. I'll set it to measure 13. Everything looks good, so let's hit the Return key to lock in our settings. Command 5 to turn on our metronome. Now record Ready the piano track, and we'll put Performer into record mode. We'll start out at the beginning of the track, but the piano track will not go into record until the beginning of measure 5. In fact, you'll notice that the record button on the screen will show up as gray until measure 5, at which time it'll turn black. Here we go with our first verse. Now rewind and play. So there you go. To save time, I've gone ahead and played in the other parts. So here's the next section starting at measure 5. Okay, now we can insert another marker at measure 5 and call it verse 1. Using the keypad, hit the decimal key, press the 5 key, and hit return to set the location reference for the next marker. Now in the mini menu of the marker window, select Add, and your new marker will appear. Double-click on the name, type in verse 1, and hit the return key. Now look what we can do. If I want to jump from section to section in a song, I can use my markers window for an autolocator. By clicking at different marker locations, you'll notice the measures counter at the top is reset to those locations. This is a very helpful shortcut. One more thing with auto recording. If you find that you made a mistake in the middle of a track, you can set a record in and record out point so that you can go back and replace just the bad section. Let's talk about the consolidated controls window. We've been working with it since the beginning. It's the window that contains the main transport controls, the main counter display, metronome and tempo controls, as well as buttons that serve as shortcuts for accessing performer functions. Starting at the left is where the current meter is displayed, followed by the current beat value. Click on the beat value to open up a dialog box. You can change the beat value by clicking on the desired note value like this. You can even use a dotted value in addition to the note value. Next to the beat value is the tempo. Tempo values can be typed in here. We're currently showing a tempo of 120 beats per minute with a quarter note getting 1 beat. Click OK. Under the tempo is the tempo slider. You can move it by clicking on the little arrows at either end or by click dragging the button on the slider. To the right are the designations for how the tempo is being controlled. Manually, like we just did, or automatically through tempo change data in the conductor track. With the remote button pressed, it's possible to control tempo from a MIDI controller such as a mod wheel. Double-click on remote and you'll see our options. Now close by clicking OK. Underneath the tempo section are 5 button selections. The first opens the chunks window. There's a whole section devoted to chunks in this video. Next, if a song's name is highlighted in the chunks window, the song button will bring its window to the forefront. Next is the custom consoles window, where you can open up a window into which you can build a custom console made up of an unlimited number of sliders, buttons, and knobs, which you can use to control your music. Next is the markers button. Finally, we have the MIDI configuration window. This window helps you to organize your entire MIDI setup. With more people acquiring more and more MIDI equipment, there needs to be a way of getting more organized. One way is through Performer's MIDI configuration feature. Open a new file. Notice in the Tracks window that 8 tracks appear with cable and channel information in a column and track names in the next. Wouldn't it be helpful to see your MIDI instrument names and MIDI channels in a column and the actual patch names in the patch column? This can be done through Performer's MIDI configuration feature. Let's select MIDI configuration. A window will appear showing the names of the instruments that I'm currently using. These are showing automatically because I use Mark of the Unicorn's Unison patch editor to control my setup. Unison allows me to control my entire setup without having to touch one instrument and even runs simultaneously with Performer. If you don't have Unison, using the MIDI configuration feature will still be a great help. Your MIDI configuration will be all of your MIDI instruments and all of the MIDI channels you'll be setting them to. Once you've created your MIDI configuration, you'll be able to call patch names by name. Under the play channel, instead of cable 3, MIDI channel 2, you'll see something like O3RW-2 to make it easier to know what's playing what. Each MIDI instrument with a MIDI channel is a device. Multi-timbral instruments are capable of being multiple devices. My O&W Pro can be 16 devices. A Proteus can be 16 devices. To start with, I'll select Add Device from the MIDI menu. Device 1 appears at the top of the window. To the right, in the channel column, I'll type M1-1, which stands for Modem Output Cable 1 from the MIDI timepiece, which is the port my O&W is connected to in MIDI channel 1. Click on the return key. Select device 1, and from the MIDI menu, select Configure Device. A box appears. Click on the box below Manufacturer and select Korg. Click under Model and select O1W Programs A. Since there are separate program lists for Bank A and Bank B. Since I have the O1's global MIDI channel set to 1, I'll set the device ID to 1. Since the O1 has its own separate output from the MIDI timepiece, this will work fine. Since I want this device to be available to 16 MIDI channels, I'll check the multi-timbral box and click OK. Now look at our MIDI configuration window. Performer has created 16 O1W Bank A devices, one for each MIDI channel. The cable and channel assignments have also been set for me. 16 channels coming out of cable 1. To the right, under Default Patch, I can click and a patch list for Bank A appears. If I wanted the 16-foot piano, program number 1, to be a default patch for MIDI channel 1, every time I open a new song, I could click on the patch name and in the MIDI menu, select Set Default Patch. Close the window. Go to track 1 of the sequence and option-click on MA1, which will change it to my list of devices where I can choose my O1W Bank A program list on channel 1 by selecting it with my mouse. The default patch is automatically showing under the patch column. Open the MIDI configuration window again. Highlight the last Bank A device. Now, if I wanted to insert a program change on track 1, I could double-click on the name track 1 and open the event list for this track. Press the I button to insert an event. A window pops up asking what type of event, and I'll choose Patch Change. I want this patch change to occur at measure 1, beat 1, tick 000, so I'll tab through them. And I can now choose a program from Bank A. How about 7, the strings? Click OK, and then click on the return key to lock it in. For some fun, hit the play button and watch the patch name change for track 1 in the patch column as a patch change occurs on beat 1. Remember, in the Play Channel column, you can toggle back and forth from cable and channel numbers to configure device names and vice versa by option clicking. You can have devices for every MIDI channel of every instrument in your setup. You can even make custom devices for instruments that are somewhat obscure and even type in your own patch lists. Once you've got your MIDI configuration to your liking, you can give it a name and save it. You can make up different MIDI configurations for different uses, studio, live playing, and so forth. With each new file, open the MIDI configuration of your choice, and when you save the file, it remembers its MIDI configuration each time it's opened. I could spend all of the available time on MIDI configurations. I wanted to at least show you some of the basics. To prepare for this section, we'll use the Basics file and open the Chunks window. Play Enable and open the Tracks window for the chorus. There are 3 memory buttons that all function along with the memory bar directly beneath. Hit the first button, the auto stop button. The memory bar appears below. Select measure 5 to be the stop measure. Now play the chorus chunk. It stops at measure 5. Now click on the auto rewind button. Rewind to measure 1, play it again and watch the counter. It stops and rewinds to the start location. Now click on the memory shuttle button. We're already at measure 1, so play it again and see what happens. This can be a handy feature when you want to practice a part over and over again. This is not a looping, but more like a combination of stop, rewind, and play. Play enable and double-click on the linear sequence chunk. Any start and end values that are entered into the edit bar can be put into memory in a feature called Remember Times. For instance, I'll click drag in the top of the ruler bar from measure 4 to measure 9 to set the edit bar. See, the edit bar is set from 4 to 9. In the Basics menu, I can select Remember Times, or as you can see, use Command R. This will load the edit bar parameters into Remember Times. Now, if I need to use these values from time to time, they're accessible. In my memory bar, all I have to do is click on the word memory, and the start and stop times will be changed to the Remember Times values. Even if I change the edit bar like this, I can reset it to the Remember Time settings by clicking on Edit once. This is a very helpful feature. We've gone over the main transport controls except for the skip backward and forward buttons that enable you to play enable the next or previous chunk in the chunks window. Inside the chunks window, watch the play enable selection change as I click on the skip buttons. Also, the currently play enable chunks name appears in the bar beneath the counter. One more thing in the main transport controls. Notice the position bar with the arrows on either end? This position bar gives you a rough idea of your location in the sequence. Clicking on either shorter inside arrow button activates a slow forward or reverse. The longer outside arrow buttons are fast forward and reverse. You can also click anywhere along the shaded field to relocate the sequence. Here's another shortcut. To get to the absolute end of a sequence, click at the far right end of the position bar. Let's open the first set file and open the chunks window. If I clicked on the Q Chunks button, each chunk would play to its end, queue up to the next song, and stop, waiting for me to start it when ready. I could even start the chunk using remote controls such as my MIDI keyboard or a pedal hooked up to my MIDI timepiece too. The Chain Chunks button is similar to the Q Chunks button except that it would select the next chunk and go ahead and play it. There will probably be a brief space of time between chunks, which is normally no problem. If seamless transitions are preferred, you'd be better off to assemble the chunks in a song window. Next is the auto record button, which we talked about earlier. The count-off button was discussed in the section on opening Performer. With the wait button selected, Performer will wait for a keystroke from the MIDI or Mac keyboard before playback or recording begins. I currently have a file open called Basics. It consists of several chunks. Using the skip buttons, I can choose the play chunk by clicking until its name appears in the status strip. I'll choose Chorus. Now click on the Tracks window button, and the Tracks window for this chunk appears instantly, almost miraculously. Here's another way. Click on the Chunks window button. Highlight the name of the verse chunk. Click on the Tracks window button, and you see the Verse Tracks window. Remember, a shortcut for opening the event list, graphic, and notation editing windows is to highlight the track name first and then click on the correct button. And here they are: Event, Graphic, and Notation. In the Chunks window, I'll place select and double-click the linear sequence chunk to open its Tracks window. Click on the Markers button. Let's say that we'd like to have the intro loop over and over from measure 2 to the beginning of measure 6. Make sure that the desired numbers are entered into the edit bar, select the tracks you want looped, in this case all, and click on the Loops button. Up pops a box with our measure numbers already entered. We can choose to have the measures loop any number of times, or even loop infinitely. I'll choose 4 times and click OK. A loop icon appears in the loop column to the left of each track selected. You also see a loop at the beginning of each track in measure 2, with a line extending to the beginning of measure 6. Select just the piano track and click on the Event List button. You even see the loop sign at measure 2 in this window with the affected measures showing. To remove a loop, you could click on this loop data in the event list and erase it by typing Command B. Or close the event list window. Make sure that the loop region of measure 2 to measure 6 is showing in the edit bar. It is. And highlight the tracks you wish to remove the loop from. I choose all tracks. Now go to the Change menu and select Clear Loops. They're gone. By the way, you can use the loop feature for recording like in a drum machine. Set your loop, turn on the overdub feature by typing the asterisk on the numeric keypad, and you're ready to go. The Region menu gives you control over many advanced functions such as transposing, quantizing, and so forth. I'll go through the categories one at a time. The first is transpose. One thing that I must shine a spotlight on. Every modification or edit done in Performer can be done while recording or playing back. You don't have to stop to make a change. You can even hear the change as the music plays. Let's transpose the music in our little 4-measure loop chunk. I'll do all this while the chunk is playing. We don't want to transpose the drum since it would select other percussion sounds. Let's just select the piano and bass track. Next, since I want to transpose the entire length of the tracks, I'll double-click on the word Edit in the Edit bar to make sure that the full length is available. In the Region menu, select Transpose. A dialog box pops up with several options. I want to transpose these parts upwards by 2 scale degrees, so I could choose Interval and move to the From box. This box is a great idea since you can use it a couple of different ways. One, I could type in the note's letter and number, for instance G3, or I could just hit the key on the keyboard like this. Then I could tab over to the 2 box and play an A3. An interesting point about these boxes, since in this case we're only talking about intervals, I can just as easily set it from C3 to D3, which is an interval of 2 half steps, and get the same results. At this point, I can click on the OK button or the return key, and the job is done. Transpositions can be undone, so let's reset the sequence to the original key in the Edit window by selecting Undo Transpose or typing Command Z. Back to square one. You have tremendous flexibility in regards to transposition, including diatonic transposition and harmonization. You'll also notice many other options in the Transpose window. I play-selected an unquantized 8-bar blues. Listen. This track needs some help. The performance is sloppy. Why? Since we are human beings, we are imperfect. The accuracy of our timing isn't always what we want it to be. That's why quantize was invented. Quantize means error correcting for time. If I feel that a part I played into the sequencer is a little too sloppy for my tastes, I can quantize it to tighten it up. For instance, let's say that the shortest note value I played was 16th notes. I could choose all of a track or a section of a track and have every note I played adjusted for timing to the nearest 16th note to make it sound more rhythmically accurate. I can even quantize several tracks at one time. Let's demonstrate. First, we have to decide what part of our performance needs to be quantized. I can tell you that the drums definitely need it, so let's select them first. I'll quantize the hi-hat and the kick snare track at the same time, so I'll highlight them both. Now we have to tell Performer which measures to quantize. We do this in the edit bar near the top of the tracks window. The edit bar is one of the most important places on your monitor screen. Burn this into your memory. Using the edit bar is one of the best ways to choose the beginning and ending points for your edits. I want to quantize the entire length of both drum tracks, so I need to set the edit bar settings for the entire length of the track. I can do this by double-clicking on the word edit in the edit bar. Now we've highlighted the hi-hat and kick snare tracks, selected the region of measures to be quantized, and now it's time to quantize. Click on the region menu at the top and select Quantize. A dialog box appears. Very important. Sometimes you might try to open the Quantize dialog box and nothing happens. Usually the reason is that you failed to first select and highlight a track name. Now back to the dialog box. The first question is what to quantize. We want to quantize just the attacks. The attacks box is already selected. Since we're working with drums, the releases and durations of the notes are not important. Next, we come to the grid where note values are selected. When quantizing a section of music, you should select the shortest note value found in that section. In this case, the shortest note value is 8th notes, so I'll click on the 8th note value to select it. Below is the tuplet box. This is for quantizing for triplets. In this box, you can select any type of tuplet you choose by typing in the number values. Any combination is possible. Next is the offset grid. This grid can be used to have the selected data shifted forward or backward by ticks to, for instance, cause a snare drum part to be played slightly ahead or behind the beat. Next is swing. This part doesn't swing, but I'll show you an example later. Next are the options. First is sensitivity. I recommend that you read the section in the manual dealing with quantized sensitivity and experiment on your own. When I use it, I generally set it at about 85%. Here's another way to preserve the human character of your performance. When none of the options are chosen, quantization defaults to 100% sensitivity and 100% strength. 100% strength means that any quantized notes will be brought back to the proper grid all the way. This can leave your performance with a stiff and mechanical feel. Instead of 100% strength, you could try a smaller percentage, which would mean that notes would be moved closer to the grid, but not all the way. There's a great example of this in the owner's manual in the Regional Commands 1 chapter under Quantizing Strength. I usually set mine to around 85%. I'm going to quantize the drum tracks to 8th notes and not select any of the other options. This will be a full 100% stiff quantize. Now, with everything set, click the OK button. Now play the sequence. A lot tighter. Just for kicks, let's quantize the bass too. Click on the bass track and open up the quantize feature. The bass track also gets no busier than 8th notes, so we'll leave its parameters alone and hit the OK button. Now listen. A lot closer. A good rule of thumb is to quantize a bass part similarly to the drum part, not necessarily with regard to note values, but more in the areas of strength and sensitivity. And now for an area that a lot of people have questions about. Swing. I'll take our little 8-bar blues and select all 4 tracks. Type in Command 0 to open up the quantize window. Swing takes every other grid point and delays it to give a shuffled feel to the beat. In other words, if we were using an 8th note grid, every other 8th note would be delayed. 100% is for a regular swing feel. Instead of spouting out numbers, let me demonstrate. Select swing and type in 100%. Now click the OK button. Let's listen to the result. Pretty slick. By the way, we can undo it with our little friend Command-Z. Now let's try a percentage less than 100%. Let's type in Command-0 and type in 80%. Click OK. Notice that it's not quite so rigid. It's a little more laid back of a shuffle. As a suggestion, I'd say that somewhere between 70 to 120% is where most of your swing quantizing will be done. Change velocity is very helpful. I use it all the time. Let's say you have some horn parts that don't blend well because the dynamics of the performance are too uneven. You can use change velocity to even the velocities. Or, let's say that all the snare drums were played with too much velocity and thus are too loud. You could lower all their velocities. I'll play select and open the change velocity chunk. Go to the tracks window, click on the solo button. Now play select and highlight the kick snare track. Now play the sequence. Notice the relative levels of the kick drum and snare drum. Open the event list for this track and notice the velocities. Let's take another look at this track in the graphic editing window. Here's another way to open editing window. From the mini menu of the edit list, move down and select graphic editing. Double click on the key for the snare drum to select all snare events. Notice that all events to the right of E1 now have little handles which signify that they've been selected. Now choose Change Velocity from the Region menu. Look at all our options. I can choose to set all events to a particular velocity. I could add a value to all velocities. I could change all selected velocities to a percentage of their present value. I could limit them to a bottom and a top velocity. I could randomize velocities up and down by a selected value. And using the emphasis box, weigh the velocity shift in either direction. Or I could take all events and change them from one velocity to another. I'll choose a couple of everyday type examples. Say that we want to make the snare drum quieter. Let's lower all snare velocities to 25% of their present value. Click OK and listen to the track. It worked. This change will be reflected on all the E1s in the event edit window. Now I'll undo this with Command-Z and play the track again. The velocities are back up again. Now check out this unevenly played piano track. I'm going to solo the track and allow it to loop so you can watch as I use the change velocity feature while the sequence is playing to even out note velocities. The track is selected, so I'll open the change velocity window and raise all of the note velocities equally by 10%. And then limit the bottom velocity range to 90. To allow lost notes to be heard again. Turning the solo off, the piano is now more easily picked out of the track. The message here is that you can use the change velocity feature of Performer to adjust the dynamics of your music as it plays. Remember also that the change velocity feature is undoable, so feel free to experiment. Undoing an edit is possible only until something new has been done in the sequence. If I would have recorded something else and then wanted to go back to this track and undo the quantize, the option would no longer be available. Now let's look at changing velocities over time. Here's a chunk into which I've recorded a drum roll of 30-second notes. I want to create a sforzando effect, so I want the first two events to be full velocity. I'll open the event list window and make the changes. Leaving the first two events alone, I selected the rest of the drum roll with a click drag, and now I'll select Change Velocity from the Region menu. Then I'll select Change Smoothly and check the second two boxes, giving them the value of 1 to 127. And I'll experiment with a curve of 50 and click on the OK button. Now play the track. Not bad. Let's undo the change, reselect the region, call up Change Velocity again, and this time try a curvature of 70. I like this better. Another way to perform this task would be to reshape the velocity data in the continuous data grid at the bottom of the graphic edit window. There's an example of this a little later in the video. The split notes command lets you selectively cut or copy notes in the selected region. You can choose the notes based upon their pitch, velocity, or duration. This is useful when wanting to double a melody line, separate the left and right hand parts in a piano track, or separate specific notes from tracks. Let's say that someone gave you a sequence on a disc where all the drums were on one track and you wanted to separate them and put them on separate tracks. You'd first add the appropriate tracks in preparation. I've done that already. I'll start by record enabling and opening the event list edit window of my drum track. Make sure the speaker is on in the top of the window. Let's listen to the first drum sound. F sharp, a closed hi-hat. We want to take out all closed hi-hats from the track and place them in their own track. First, let's set the region. In the track's time ruler, drag over the first 4 measures. That'll set the edit bar times. Now click on the drum track to select it. Next, in the region menu, choose Split Notes. We'll choose Cut at the top to remove them from the track. Then we'll select Notes Between and using the keyboard controller, tap F sharp 1. Tab to the next box and hit the note again. We've chosen to cut only the note of F sharp 1 from the track from measures 1 through 4. Click on OK. Now we'll paste our hi-hats into their new track. No need to change the edit bar, the measures will be the same. Click on the hi-hat track name. Under the edit menu, choose Paste, or you could type Command V. Now double-click on the hi-hat track. Here are your F sharp 1s. You can create controller data under the region menu, but it's more fun to draw it in the graphic or notation edit windows. I'll select my loop record input quantize chunk for this example. You're going to love this. I'm going to draw controller data for a volume fade out. Select the piano track and open its graphic editing window. Resize the continuous data grid below. Before we do this, look at the top right of the graphic edit window at the little box with a note value next to it. This box displays the current time resolution for editing. When the box is selected, notes and data will snap to locations that correspond to the resolution display. If the checkbox is deselected, data will not snap to grid. You can change the resolution by clicking on the note value like this, and selecting another note value, and clicking on the beat value and typing in a beat value. Make sure the edit resolution box is unselected so that it doesn't quantize my continuous data. We're going to have this track fade from full volume to no volume and back up again in 4 measures. Now click on the Insert button. Choose Controller. Now choose number 7 for volume. The cursor arrow becomes a crosshair. While holding down the Option key, click the crosshair at the desired starting point like this, and drag the line to the end of the section you want to affect, and then let up on the mouse button. Notice there's a handle at both ends and one in the middle. You can click on the handle and reshape the line like this. When the curve is to your liking, type the return key or click the mouse anywhere. Now click on the solo button in this window and play the track. Very easy and very effective. This can also be undone with Command Z to try another curve. To show you step record, I've opened a new sequence with a piano track record enabled. To select step record, choose step record from the Basics menu. I've got my counter set to measure 1. All I have to do now is choose note values and play notes. Notice at the left that you're given the tick value of each step, and that you can even choose the amount of time that the note is held with regard to staccato and legato. Also notice at the bottom of the window the current timing location, measure 1. Now I'll play in a short little ditty. A C quarter note staccato at 20%. Select an 8th note value and click on the tuplet box for 3 in the time of 2 and play a triplet. Tuplet off for a couple of quarter notes. The first with 100% and the second with 20%. Start the next measure with a quarter rest and leave the duration at 20% for a quarter note chord on beat 2. Now for the half note on beat 3, reset the duration to 100%. Close the step record window and we'll play our little treasure. There you have it. Here's one more example of step recording something that is normally technically difficult, a drum roll. I'll turn off the piano track and record enable track 2. Starting at measure 1, we'll select step record. 30-second notes are good for open single-stroke rolls, and I'll set the duration at 20%. Here, and while we're at it, let's open up the graphic editing window here so we can watch these notes as they come in. And I'll start out with a couple of heart strikes to simulate a beginning flam and then continue up to the first beat of measure 3. Okay, now close the step record window and let's listen. The notes are now entered, but I want some more control over the velocities of the notes. This time, I'll go into the graphic edit window and reshape the velocity data freehand to have the drum strokes get progressively harder. First, I need to set the view filter so that I don't have to look at the note off velocities. Mini menu, set view filter, deselect off velocities. Click OK. No more off velocity icons to deal with. Click drag a selection box over the velocity data to select it. To reshape our velocity data freehand instead of with a line tool, click on the reshape button to create a crosshair. This time, don't hold down the Option key. Just click and drag the crosshair on the continuous data grid to get the shape you want. When done, click anywhere in the window and we'll rewind the track and play it. There it is. One of the most interesting and helpful features of Performer is chunking. There are 2 types of chunks, sequences and songs. A sequence could last the entire length of a composition, or it could be an 8-measure verse or chorus. Several elements such as verses, choruses, and so forth in the form of chunks can be assembled into songs, allowing us to experiment with different arrangements. The file I'll be working with is a 62-measure sequence called linear sequence. Open the Chunks window with the Chunks button. Place select linear sequence and double-click its name to open its tracks window. Taking a look at its markers window, you can see the song form, song setup, intro, first verse, and so forth. If I wanted the ability to try some different variations of my song, I could convert it into multiple sequence chunks. Measure 1 holds the song setup with program changes, volume settings, and so forth. I'll make it into a chunk by selecting the region of Measure 1 in the ruler bar by clicking at the top. This sets the edit bar to the left. See, start Measure 1, end Measure 2. Now highlight the names of the tracks you want included in the chunk. In the mini menu, select Create Chunk. Name it Song Setup. Leave it on Auto and click OK. We now have a new chunk in the Chunks window. Now let's take the second section, the intro. Define the region, Measure 2 to Measure 6. Highlight track names. Mini menu for Create Chunk. Name it Intro. Auto End Time, and click OK. Each chunk will have its own tracks window, which you can see by double-clicking on the chunk's name. Double-click on the intro chunk. There it is. Up pops its track window, which I'll move over and resize. Notice in the edit window the start and end time. Measure 1 through Measure 5. Now let's make a chunk out of the first verse. Go back to the linear sequence tracks window and define the region measures 6 to 14. Select all tracks, create chunk, name it verse 1, auto end time, and click OK. Finally, I'll get the chorus. Linear sequence tracks window, define region measure 22 to 30, highlight all tracks, create chunk, name it chorus, auto end time, click OK. Now I have the essential elements of the song in chunks. So I'll go into the mini menu of the chunks window and add a song. Notice that it has a different icon at the left. Now play Enable the Song. Double-click on Song 1 and its window appears. Resize the window to give us a bigger song grid. And we'll move the chunk window so that we can get to all the chunks. First, let's click drag the song setup chunk onto the song grid. Notice a column automatically appears after the chunk. Now let's click drag the intro into our song. Now the verse. Let's put another verse after it by option dragging the first verse to the right. By the way, did you know that option dragging is the same as a copy and paste? It is. Now for the chorus. Option click another verse. Option click another chorus. And even another chorus. Repeating choruses and out. Now let's play the song for a few measures so that you can see how it works. Okay, here comes the next verse. And it'll basically play the whole thing through in order. Now let's try a different arrangement. Move verse 1 out of the way and put a chorus in its place with verse 1 going where the chorus was. Now listen. The possibilities are endless. You could assemble several songs with totally different arrangements. You're playing a MIDI duo gig at night using your Macintosh as a sequencer, and you want to assemble set lists. No problem. Simply bring all your sequences into one file using the load command. Here's how to do it. Open a new file, click on the Chunks button to open the Chunks window. Move the Chunks window to the bottom of the display and make it bigger. Under the File menu, select Load. Now choose a folder with all your MIDI sequences in it. I'll choose my Originals file. Now I'll choose a sequence Eddie's Home and click Open. The load window opens showing Eddie's Home. Click on Eddie's Home to select it and click OK. Now it's in the Chunks window, By the way, we can get rid of sequence 1 since there's nothing in it. You can't delete a play-enabled chunk, so I'll play-enable Eddie's Home and then highlight sequence 1 and select Delete from the mini menu. It's gone. Now go to the File menu and select Load again. Select Generic Space. By clicking Open or double-clicking on its name, you'll notice that it shows up as sequence 1. The reason for this is that it was never given a chunk name, but was instead saved with its name as the file name. I'll click on sequence 1 and click OK. Once it's in the chunks window, Option-click on the name sequence 1 and type in the name Generic Space and click OK. Now it's a chunk with a name. I'm going to load several more sequences into the chunks window to save you time. Now, as you see, I have 6 songs in the chunks window. They'll play back in any order I put them in. Let's say that you're using Performer as a live sequencer. In the chunks window, we see a list of songs to be played in a set. Just before I go up on stage, one of our fans asked that we play his favorite song first. Upon his depositing a crisp new $100 bill into the tip jar, it's time to rearrange the set order. No problem. All I have to do is to click-drag the chunk to its new position like this. I can now use the Cue Chunks and Chain Chunks buttons under the transport controls to decide how to play through the list. I can also play-enable chunks by cycling through all 6 chunks using the skip buttons in the transport control window. Finally, I can save this sequence playlist by going to the File menu, selecting Save As, and naming it, for example, Dinner Set. There are countless other uses for chunking, but due to time constraints, I refer you to the Performer Owner's Manual. So, after all this, let me try to help you understand what the word file means and what a chunks function is. A file is the document that you save onto your hard drive. When you save a sequence, you save it in a file that has a name. A file can contain many sequences. You can arrange sequences in song windows. Chunk is another word for either a sequence or a song. Just remember, a file is the thing that you save. Chunks are found within files. I'll play a piano part into the sequencer and print it out for you. Here we go. Now that it's on the track, go to the conductor track and set the key to G major. Insert a key change. G major. OK. Return. Close it up. Alrighty. Name the track. Piano. Return. Select the measures to be printed. Click on the track name. Under File, select Print Options. Title page. Now let's put in here my song. Composer. Lance Abair. And I can tell down at the bottom here that if we type 2 of these little A's, we'll get the date. We'll get 2 of those bad boys in there. Page options. Now, don't worry about a header or footer. Show full part names before first system. We'll go with that, but we will not show abbreviated part names before other systems. Okay, and let's have a measure number every 5 measures. And track options. Split notes at C3, which is middle C. I can use the quantized tracks box to have Performer do it automatically, or I can uncheck this box and go into Performer to be even more selective. I'll check the box. Click OK. Now under the File menu, select Print to Screen. The computer is now working. Pretty fast though, actually. It's done, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so I'll say I'll take this. Now under the File menu, select Print Notation. Okay, now it's doing its little work there. We'll hit Print. Gives us a little printout here, and we'll hit Print here. And here's the result. Fast and easy. If you have several tracks and you want to only print one, select the track you want printed and set the start and end measures in the edit bar. If you want more of a score format, select the desired tracks by shift-clicking on their names along with the start and end measures, and it'll print out several tracks down the page. It couldn't be easier. Well, that's about it. It's been very interesting trying to decide what to include and what to leave out in a 2-hour-long instructional video when I could easily have filled up 20 hours of tape with information. Fortunately, Performer has a great manual that's easy to understand, even for a novice. When I have a question, I go to the index in the back, find the topic, turn to the proper page, and get the help I want. Use your manual. Mine is always next to my computer. See? And don't forget Performer's online help as well. I hope this video has helped you understand some of Performer's great features. Happy sequencing!